Hello everybody, welcome to part 2 of the Firehouse build. We'll start today's video by gluing the front and two sides together.
Okay, this is where things get fun. Now we're going to put a roof in here. And I've already made one mistake because my plan was to put the roof down here, but you can see that gap. That's not going to work. So we're going to have to keep this up top here. So I have to make sure that this doesn't interfere to keep this pushed out. And so we're doing a lot of fiddling here in order to get this right. I'm a little worried about warpage on this piece here. This is going to be tricky. And this piece, it bows. So we're going to have a little bit of fun here. But I don't think it's going to be unmanageable. But what I'm going to do first, though, is I'm going to glue this in place. In a couple spots. And I'm going to do that for stability. Because of these windows, this piece has to go in first. Now, that's a good thing about using this latex silicone adhesive because it's flexible, so it'll allow me to weasel the thing around after it's heated, and then we'll just go and glob the glue in there and make the thing work. Now, since I'm down below this, I'm going to have to trim this at the edges. And so we'll set this aside for the moment again. Now, let's take a look at something else real quick. Is it still in frame? Yeah. So, I test fit this. Somehow this is wider than the perimeter, because I guess this outer piece, no, that can't be, doesn't make sense. So remember, our plan was to make this piece go on top of this for our replacement trim piece to finish off once ever I get to the store to pick up some more of this square plastic. So I'll have to bring some L and glue that to the top there to get this in place as well. So this will have to be cut back, and I'll show you another one of my tricks to clean that up later. So another problem to deal with.
Take a step back to see the truth around you.
So with the roof tacked in place, I start the process of gluing the fourth wall in place, starting by tacking the corners and then hard gluing with CA the bulging parts in order to get everything to fit tightly. As you notice, I painted the windows silver, and this is something I do with buildings that I don't do an interior structure with or plan on lighting ever. I use silver with darker frames like green or black, and I use black with silver frames for any other light color frames. As I mentioned earlier, with everything glued in place, it's my satisfaction that I'm just going to put a heavy bead of silicone along all these edges. This has the, just adds strength to the whole structure and will prevent flex the way you saw it do when I was gluing the sides together.
Now on the front here, you can do a little restaurant scene because that is a Burgers and Brew, and the scene is pretty nice, and the location will be a high visibility area. We're going to be looking. Am I still in frame? Yeah, we'll be looking at this way. This will actually be up against the edge of the layout, so the front of this building will be in plain view. So there's Burgers and Brew restaurant there. I'm not going to do the Burgers and Brew necessarily, but the brown color corresponds to the interior colors there, and we will just let the colors follow through. We're not going to model it. I'm going to get some chairs and tables and people and put a scene, but the sidewalk will be out front. This piece of sidewalk is going to be the regular sidewalk, and then this is going to be the restaurant eating area, because this will be placed right underneath this and it'll fit flush like that. Now these are different dimensions, and so I got a piece of scrap styrene big enough, and that will raise that to be the same height. So now we just gotta make some cuts. And today we get passing grade. Could probably do this with the acetate, but since I'm getting low on that, I'm just going to do it with silicone.
The next step here was to adhere the sidewalk to the base. So I made this back wall from a piece of styrene and L, and the intent is to glue it to the back so that looks kind of like the prototype, which has some storage and a kitchen along the back wall. Because I made it to what I expected to do and not what I actually did, I now have to take a little piece of the L off and cut off a little tip of the wall there so that this piece goes in between the L brackets that are now underneath the roof. Now that I'm happy with the cuts, we glue it in place. So now that the building is beginning to look complete, I put the doors temporarily in place and test fit the building on its base to see if I have any interference, clearance, or anything that needs to be cleaned up. Now these trim pieces are fiddly detailed. Because it's at the top in a high visibility location, it took a lot of time to get this straight and size everything. The first thing I did was put a couple pieces of styrene along the back to make sure all four edges are the same height, spreading the adhesive applied thinly across the back in order to minimize the thickness of the glue, which does have an impact on this later. I started by putting 2 pieces of styrene, but you'll see I ended up stripping one off later because the thickness of the glue messed up the height of all the pieces together. In order to make everything fit right, only 1 piece of styrene was needed. This roof trim is an important detail in a high visibility spot, so I'm going to show you the whole process and a lot of the fiddling that I did in order to make these things fit properly and tightly. I use the same process that I stated in other videos and other places, where I make my cuts long and then file it to a finished product. And you see me here measuring off the cut and the 45 degree based on where I wanted it, and then taking it over the cutting board and completing the cut. And again, we're cutting this long, and then we'll file it back down so that it meets the other joint. You see here that I cut this piece a little too short, and it's almost the exact size that it needs. It turns out that the only thing I didn't do here was to make a cut, because the cut's almost exactly where it needs to be, and I was just able to do final sanding in order to make the joint line up with its corresponding corners. So I had to think ahead a little bit. I was not going to be able to get the roof onto or into its final position with the trim pieces on, so I glued some extra styrene to the sides and measured it. This will be the new seat for the roof, and then we'll cut the roof down to size, put it in place, and then glue the trim pieces on top of it, and everything will be in its final resting place. With those components in place, we go back to finishing off the trim pieces. So, not being completely confident that everything was going to go together to my satisfaction, what I did was glued the back pieces in place because I was happy with the fitment there, and I kept the front loose so that, one, if I had to pull these things apart, that it would do so with minimum repair after the fact, and it would also allow me to flex the front end of it to make cuts, as you'll see here shortly. So before we glue the last piece of trim in place, we will cut the roof down to size and glue that in place, and then complete the task with gluing the front trim piece in its final location, and we'll have a building that looks complete. Thank you guys very much for watching part 2. In part 3, we'll start super detailing the building. And in the meantime, like, share, subscribe. And we'll look forward to seeing you next week. Merry Christmas.